I don't mind.
Okay, here's a story from many years ago. I was working in UPS, and there was a guy, a believer. He was a truck washer. And he was trying to go to seminary, but it was taking him forever because he felt like he had to provide for his family. And he's just like barely able to stay awake, doing his job and going to seminary. And he knew God's call on his life. We had had many great talks, and he goes, but I just have to keep doing this. I said, why? Well, because I'm the man. I have to provide. And I looked at him, and in all my years of wisdom, which at that point I had just been saved a few years, I looked at him, I said, who provided for Jesus? The next week he quit. She will protect you. She will watch over you. Oh, I wish we had time to go into each of these. Oh, it's break time. We'll finish what will wisdom do, and then we'll go for break. Your days will be many, and years will be added to your life. Again, this is not a guarantee written in one of the 10 commandments, but it's a general truism. The person who gets wisdom loves life. Do you love life, or do you endure life? A person's wisdom yields patience. So when you get wisdom, it works together with the Holy Spirit in your life to produce the fruit of the Spirit. Why don't I have the fruit of the Spirit in my life, man? I just come apart and I just snap, and I'm not love, joy, peace. I'm the other side of that coin. Get wisdom. And you'll begin to see the fruit of the Spirit grow and develop and strengthen in your life. Wisdom is like honey for you. If you find it, there's a future hope for you that will not be cut off. And then you look at Ecclesiastes, which we'll look at tomorrow, where everything is meaningless and hopeless. Great contrast. And wisdom, again, will keep you safe. So let's go ahead, let's go ahead and just take a break. And I'm going to have to speed up.
We'll do 15 minutes. But real quick, I just wanted to thank you guys. We raised almost $3,000 towards those guys. And so Chris and I are kind of working it out, like how that's going to get kind of divvied out. But that was amazing and really generous of you guys. Thank you so much. If I could just talk with those guys that are on the board really quick when we break. So we'll do 15 minutes. We'll come back 35 after.
Yeah? Hello? Is it on? I can't. Oh, yeah. Now I can hear it.
Sorry. I was like 245.
You saying anything, Andrew? All right, find your way back, please. While you're meandering back, I'll tell you my story of exercising great wisdom this week. On January 2nd, my wife had surgery on her ankle, and we hadn't heard anything out of the insurance company. And I wasn't happy. And I sent them an email saying, you know, it's been a couple days short of 3 months and we haven't heard anything from you guys yet. And they write back and they say, oh, well, we could take 3 months, and so just wait. So I was just thrilled with that. So then 2 days ago, I got a letter in the mail saying, and the whole bill was about $15,000, and there was one bill for $100 that wasn't coded by the doctor. So they said, we've held up the payment on all of your bills for this one $100 bill. And, you know, we're not even starting the process until we get the coding for this bill. And Randy was not a happy camper. You know, all the people that I owe the money to for the surgery are like, pay up. And so Randy was not a happy camper. And I'm like, what kind of customer service is this? Don't I pay my bill every month? Blah, blah, blah. And so I exhibited extreme wisdom because I was rather irate, and I said, Chris, if I call them, it's not going to be pretty. You call them. That was my extreme wisdom for the week. Wow. Oh. Incredible. All right. So we're just going to fly through a few screens here, but so much of this book is the Father instructing His Son. And I don't want to go back through DTS and the Father heart of God, but I think this is, you know, a simile. It's a similar thing. It's, you know, no father wants their son to, or their daughter to turn out to be a creep, or a thief, or a drug addict, or a hooker, or an adulterer, or whatever. And so you can get a bit of the heart of God in this book by just seeing the heart of Solomon for his son. Do you want your kids to grow up lousy? To cause you all sorts of grief and tears? Of course not. And God gave us this book because He doesn't want us to grow up lousy. So I wrote here, 25 different times in this book we see the Father addressing His Son. That's not bad in 31 chapters. God's heart for His people, for His children, whether it's son or daughter, you know, it's kind of a generic. Sometimes it's, you know, a father addressing their child, so you don't actually know what the gender is, but there are 25 specific times when the father addresses their son, and then there's the other ones thrown in there. So who wrote it? Pretty much general agreement is that Solomon wrote the book. You know, it begins with the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, the king of Israel. Did Solomon write? Now, if you ask any liberal theologian or liberal Bible scholar, they'll sit there and go, Solomon probably didn't write it because X, Y, and Z. And it was probably written much later, you know, and they'll give you this whole crazy line of reasoning, because the truth about most liberal Bible scholars is they don't believe the Bible. They like to tear it down. They like to get you to join them in their misery. But if you'll use this book, you'll reject their wisdom and choose God's wisdom. So anyway, it says right there, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, and here's when Solomon was king. It probably wasn't in the last 10 years of his life that he wrote this. It was probably earlier on, maybe, you know, 750 or something, because, you know, those final years, for the most part, weren't very pretty. And the group of the sayings of the wise, we have no idea who wrote that. This guy, we have no idea who he was or when it was written. There's actually that whole section in here that was, it says it was assembled by the men of Hezekiah. So Hezekiah had some guys who had got a hold. You know, Hezekiah got the law first, and it changed his life, literally. And then somehow he got these Proverbs and thought, these are important enough that I need to assemble these together and send them down all the way to DBS in Kona, Hawaii. No, he probably didn't think that, but it was great that he did what he did. How many Proverbs did Solomon write?
3,000.
Huh?
3,000.
I think I heard Stephen first, didn't I?
1,005?
No, wrong answer. 3,000. Elliot's going to be fat by the end of this class. Or I take that back. Olivia will be fat. All right. So again, we don't have any idea who these guys are. Whenever you see a word in Hebrew and it ends or begins with L, that's one of the Hebrew words for God. And so, in general, it's thought that Lemuel means belonging to God. So when you're reading and you see L at the end of the word, don't necessarily try to make that part of that phrase of the word, but pronounce it separately, because that's, however you pronounce it, that's how the Hebrews would have done it. God would have been either at the beginning or the end of the word. Did I see a hand? No? I didn't see that hand. All right, so some people think this was potentially Solomon, but again, I don't think Solomon would have written that about one of his 700 wives. All right, so let's check it out. Let's go into the beginning of this book here. Ooh, am I going to have to wear my glasses? Nasty. Who did the small print anyway? And you know what really kills me in this book? The green. All right, chapter 1. These are the Proverbs of Solomon, David's son, king of Israel. Their purpose, so why did he write the book? Their purpose is to teach people wisdom and discipline, to help them understand the insights of the wise. Now, if you go to 1 Kings chapter 4, there's this whole list of wise guys, like the Three Stooges, only different. And Solomon is, said to be wiser than all these people. But there's this whole list of different men of wisdom. We don't know if they were Israelites or wherever they were from. We don't really know who any of those guys were. But there's this whole list in 1 Kings chapter 4 of these wise guys. So let's see. The purpose is to teach people to live a disciplined and successful life. Oh, I skipped something. Discipline, to help them understand the insights of the wise, to teach people to live disciplined and successful lives, to help them do what is right and just and fair. That sound like something you want to do? You want to do what's right and just and fair? Yeah. Well, this is a good book for you. It's a good book to memorize stuff out of. I'll talk about that maybe just a little bit when we get into the fear of the Lord. Let's see. These Proverbs will give insight to the simple. Now, usually when it's talking about simple or foolish in Proverbs, it's talking about those who are doing dumb stuff, including usually immorality. And so when it's saying the simple, or those involved in folly, it's saying that this book can even give wisdom to them if they'll listen. That it's so profound. So shouldn't it be filling us with wisdom if we're seeking after it? Let's see. These Proverbs will give insight to the simple, knowledge and discernment to the young. Oh, how many? You read that list of spiritual gifts in 1 Corinthians 12, and you think, man, I wish I had those gifts. Wow, I wish I had that gift of discernment. I could see demons everywhere. I don't think that's quite what this is talking about. But these Proverbs will help you discern, usually, between right and wrong, to be able to make the choice. It helps you to see, and then it helps you to make the correct choice. Listen, or let the wise listen to these Proverbs and become even wiser. So, see that?
Yeah, I didn't know if this book was for me, but that verse.
Yeah, it does. I agree, man. Yeah, let the wise listen. If you think you've already got some wisdom, you haven't arrived. No. I mean, when we talk about the wisdom of God compared to the wisdom of Randy, ain't even close. When you talk about infinite against finite, oh, we don't have time to talk about that stuff, but it's fun to talk about when you get the chance. Let them become even wiser. Let those with understanding receive guidance by exploring the meaning in these proverbs and parables. For the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. That doesn't mean if you're not getting up at 6 in the morning and doing the workout across the way that you're a fool. You don't have to be disciplined like that. It doesn't hurt, but that's really not the type of discipline that this is talking about. Again, it doesn't hurt, although, I could get in big trouble for saying this, but I'll say it anyway, because I'm such a black and white guy. Paul writes to Timothy and he says, bodily exercise is of some value, but godliness is profitable for all things, both in this life and in the life to come. So all you exercise freaks, freak on. But remember, godliness is way more valuable. And this body of yours one day is going to become dust. All those big bulging muscles but godliness is profitable in this life and the life to come. Okay, I was thinking of making a sign and going in the middle of the night and tacking it up on the door outside the gym over here. But I refrained. All right, so they help you become wiser. They help you do what, not just think about or meditate on, but they help you to do what is right and just and fair. This is the thing I hate about this school. As much as I love this school, I hate that we don't have time to go into stuff in detail. You know, during the last school when we had Song of Solomon, you know how much time we got in Song of Solomon? Half an hour. I'll try to give you 35 minutes tomorrow. Hey, Bob!
I'm one of the weightlifters over here, buddy.
You know, Bob's got these. The guy's 60. He's 60. Maybe he's 61 now. He and I work together in the auto shop. I still go up there once in a while, but I spent a lot of time my early years here on campus working with Bob in the auto shop. And I'm still envious of his six-pack. Oh, yeah, you can see my six-pack there. Obviously, I'm not envious enough, or I'd be doing sit-ups or something. Did I? Yeah. Okay. So much of this book, again, the main theme over and over and over is speaking right. Or speaking wrong, whichever the case. Over and over and over and over and over, our mouths can either be a blessing or a curse. Who said that?
James.
James, yes. All right. I don't know if we'll have time to get into James, but our mouths are meant to be a blessing, and Proverbs and the wisdom of Proverbs can help us to have our mouths be a blessing and not a curse. Okay. Too much talk leads to sin. But be sensible and keep your mouth shut. Okay, does that mean I should just shut up for the next hour? That's probably not the context that was written into. But it's so easy for us to talk a lot and to get in trouble. Some people make cutting remarks, but the words of the wise bring healing. Here I was, I had been saved just a few months, and I was going to this Bible, it wasn't really a Bible college, it was a Christian liberal arts college in Oregon. In Oregon. And we were standing in lunch line, one of my roommates and this gal, and we were standing in the line one day waiting for food. And I had tried really hard to be careful with my mouth and to be kind, in particular to this girl, because she wasn't very attractive and she was the target of many jokes. And I remember I said something that I wished I could have pulled back the second I said it. Because she looked at me and she said, "I thought you were different from everybody else in this college, but now I see you're not." Man, talk about a dagger going into your heart. Our words can do so much good or so much wrong. To your friends, to your family, to your classmates. Our words should bring healing. The more we get this book in us and the wisdom of this book inside of us, our words will bring healing. I love this one. Even fools are thought wise when they keep silent. Again, it's talking about morally deficient people. People who are off sleeping around. They're thought to be wise if they just shut up. When their mouths are shut, they seem intelligent. Oh, I'd love to just go off on that one, but there's more hope for a fool than for somebody who speaks without thinking. A man of knowledge uses words with restraint. That's what I didn't do that day in that lunch line. There was no restraint. It was just dumbness. The mouths of the fool are their ruin, for they trap themselves with their lips. Again, these are very few of the many, many verses. Watch your tongue and keep your mouth shut, and you'll stay out of trouble. You don't have to give your opinion about everything all the time. Again, over 100 references to words, to gossip, to lips, to speaking, to your tongue, to lies, to what comes out of your mouth, and to being silent. It's the main theme of Proverbs, and it's the hardest one for us. You know, Paul says we should be speaking the truth in love. And he also says, encourage one another and build each other up. The writer of Hebrews says the same thing. Daily, you should be encouraging one another. And of course, James and the whole thing on the tongue, which we don't have time. But you've all heard it before if you've been around the block a time or two in Christianity. With our tongue, we bless God and we curse man, who are made, I love this, the King James says, who are made after the similitude of God. Of course, it just means the likeness of God, but that's the old King James. There's another great King James thing in James where it says, the superfluity of naughtiness. What do you think that means?
Santa Claus.
No, it just means an excess of being bad. Sorry, no peppermint patties for that one. I love those. Superfluity of naughtiness. All right, justice in Proverbs is another one of those good themes that I wish we could spend this whole class just on justice in Proverbs and justice in general, but we can't. But they show up, the words just and justice show up 16 times. The concept shows up more without using the exact words. But wisdom and justice always go hand in hand. Yep, they always work hand in hand. So if you want to work for justice, call out to God for wisdom. Study this book. Live like this book is true. And then you will begin to see your lives become more and more effective for the cause of the just and for justice around the world. Didn't think you'd get that out of Proverbs, did you? It's there. If you want to do justice, it has to be linked together with wisdom. The Lord is more pleased when we do what is right and just than when we offer Him sacrifices. Now, this was Old Testament. Sacrifices were required. It says a similar thing. What is it? Psalms 110. It talks about Jesus. You didn't really want sacrifice. What you wanted was a heart. You know, and it's quoted in Hebrews. But God is more interested in us being people who live justly. Who has shown thee, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, but to do justly. And again, it works hand in hand with wisdom. Oh, I keep looking up here, but I have it right in front of my face too. But that's bigger print. When justice is done, it brings joy to the righteous, but terror to the evildoers. You know why? Because the evildoers make money off injustice. And they don't want to lose their money. That's why most injustice exists in this world. Selfishness and bucks. By justice, a king gives a country stability. Now, have any of you ever lived in a kingdom? Ah, yes. A king has so much influence over his nation. Solomon went downhill in this, didn't he? At the end, didn't he oppress his people? Didn't he tax them ridiculously? We may not have read that yet, but you'll see it. But by justice, again, working hand in hand with wisdom, it will give stability. What country in this world doesn't need stability? You look at our country and it's financially a disaster and morally a disaster. You look at so many of the nations around the world, and because they have lacked justice for the poor, they're a mess. But if a king or a ruler of a nation or, a senate or whatever would bother to find out what justice is all about and treat their people justly, instead of ripping them off and using them and stepping on them, most of us YWAMers, we could be out of jobs. But it's possible for rulers of a land to indeed be just. Unfortunately, most of them are not. So we're not out of a job. The righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern. How about you? Do you care about justice for the poor? Is it just like a thought in your head that makes you have warm fuzzies because you've thought nicely about the poor? When Paul went into Jerusalem, and they gave him all this advice, and it says, and they wanted me to remember the poor, the very thing I was eager to do. What book's that in? Who said that? All right, Krister finally scores here. Oh! I got to throw more overhand, I'm afraid. You know, when I was a kid, I always wanted to be a baseball pitcher, but now you can see why I'm not. So I want to try to mostly recite for you a bit of a sermon by Martin Luther King Jr. It's just a small portion of it. It was a sermon he was doing 2 months before he died, before he was assassinated, based on the text of the 3 Hebrew children paying the price and going to the fiery furnace. So let me just try to do this. You know, I'm not Martin Luther King. I don't have his amazing speech-making abilities or anything, and I say to you this morning, that if you have not found something that is so dear and so precious to you that you would be willing to die for it, then you are not fit to live. You may be 38 years old, as I happen to be, and one day an opportunity stands before you and calls upon you for you to make a stand for some great principle, some great issue, or some great cause. But you refuse to make the stand. How'd you like to hear preaching like that? But you refuse to make the stand. You refuse to make it because you are afraid. You refuse to make it because you want to live longer. You're afraid that you'll lose your job. You're afraid that somebody might criticize you, or that you'll lose your popularity, or that somebody will stab you, or shoot at you, or bomb your house, and so you refuse to make the stand. Well, you may go on and live until you're 90, but you're just as dead at 38 as you will be at 90. And the cessation of breathing in your life is but a belated announcement of an earlier death of your spirit. You died when you refused to stand up for what is right. You died when you refused to stand up for the truth. You died when you refused to stand up for justice. We can stand up for justice as we learn the wisdom of this book. And we learn the delicate balances between international law and our own concepts and what we think people need and what people actually need. But as we learn wisdom, we can navigate all these pathways to go forth and bring more justice into the world. Get me going. I'm just warming up. Let's see here. Okay, so now we're going to, again, there's just no time to go through this book chapter by chapter or verse by verse. You just can't do it in this school. So I'm just hitting on these highlights, and now I want to hit on the fear of the Lord. How many of you, when you did your DTS, did you get an entire week in your DTS of teaching on the fear of the Lord? Raise your hands if you got an entire week. 4, 5, 6. I have trouble counting. Math was never my strong suit. Do you know that in the original planning, when they started finally putting together the whole concept of DTS, it wasn't just the School of Evangelism, but when they started putting together the whole discipleship school, every school was supposed to get an entire week on the subject of the fear of the Lord. Without exception, because it is so vital. And yet, most of us hardly ever hear a word about the subject. I have this little picture of lightning because when I was about 10 years old, I was sitting against a telephone pole waiting for a bus. And back in the day, there wasn't plastic reflectors on your telephone poles. They were made out of metal. And I was just sitting, leaning against the pole, waiting for the bus, and the pole got hit by lightning. And I have no idea what happened next. But fortunately, a friend of my oldest brother saw it happen, and he said I was just totally wandering in the road. I didn't know anything. I don't remember any of this. He picked me up, and he took me home because he knew my oldest brother. But you know what? I grew up in a church where everything was the fear of God. It was, the scripture says that a false balance is an abomination to the Lord. Right here in Proverbs it says that. And I had the false balance of everything is the fear of God. That's the only way to relate to God. And the other side is everything's the love of God and He just cares for you so much and He'd never do anything to hurt you. And both of those are false balances, and they're both an abomination to the Lord. We need to both comprehend and live in the love of God and the fear of God. And we just like to overlook this. It's not a pleasant subject. It's just not. Proverbs 8:13. I'm not used to this translation. All who fear the Lord will hate evil. Therefore I hate pride and arrogance and perverse speech. I didn't memorize it in this translation or really in King James, but the fear of the Lord is the hatred of evil. That was the first Bible verse I ever memorized within a month of getting saved. Some guy just came up to me one night at a college age group and he said, Randy, this would be a good verse for you to memorize. And I thank God for that. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil. Are you nonchalant about evil? Do you fill your minds with evil things and say, oh, it's okay. Oh, I can go see this. I can go do that. It's okay. It won't hurt. It hurts. Don't get me going. But I am so grateful that that was the first Bible verse I've ever memorized in my life. I don't know if it's something to do with my upbringing, where I was always taught God was out to get you. That's what I thought after that lightning strike. I literally thought God was out to get me and He missed. But He's going to get me next time. That is an unhealthy fear of God. But we do need to have the fear of God every day in our lives. If I have a gravestone after I die, I want this next verse as what my grave says. Nehemiah says, I appointed my brother as governor because he was a man of integrity and he feared God more than most. How'd you like that on your gravestone? That's what I want on my gravestone. So if I have a heart attack and fall over, you make sure, I'm charging you today to make sure that ends up on my gravestone. He feared God more than most. You could trust him because he was more afraid of God than he was desirous of doing wrong or selfish gain. How about you? What's the fear of God level in your lives? Is it down low? Would they write on your gravestone, he feared God less than most? Or would they say, this guy feared God more than most? So we'll briefly look at these. What's the fear of the Lord? How do we develop the fear of the Lord? I just use FOL because I'm not so good at typing. The benefits of the fear of the Lord, is it a New Testament concept? Can we love Him and fear Him at the same time, or is that a contradiction? Now, the only time I've ever taught in a DTS, I took an entire week, which meant at this particular school, it meant I had 19 hours. And I spent the entire time, except 1 hour, teaching on the fear of the Lord. The Bible is full of it. And yet, most of the time, we don't see it lived out among Christians. We don't. I'm sorry to say. We just do not see it lived out. The exact match of the phrase shows up 27 times, but there's over 100 different verses that say fear Him and fear God throughout the Scriptures. We just read in Proverbs 1:7, the fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge. We also read, what is it, in chapter 9 maybe, where it says, it's the foundation of wisdom. Another translation says, it's the beginning of wisdom. You want to get wise? You're not going to grow in wisdom any greater than you grow in the fear of the Lord. And therefore you won't be doing justly. So seek after the fear of the Lord and wisdom simultaneously, so to speak. And then Solomon goes on and he says, the fear of the Lord actually teaches wisdom. It teaches wisdom. I don't know how I'm going to do this in 45 minutes when it took me, hours and hours in the Cook Islands. You ever get a chance to go to the Cook Islands? Very good. Beautiful, great YWAM base there. So I was trying to figure out who actually made this quote. I found the quote, but I couldn't ever give credit. So it wasn't really anonymous, it just wasn't credited. But it says, some redefine the fear of God for believers to be respecting Him. While respect is definitely included in the concept of fearing God, there is more to it than that. A biblical fear of God for the believer includes understanding how much God hates sin and fearing His judgment on sin, even in the life of a believer. Now, if we went back to Proverbs 8:13, the other day when Dan was in here, I thought for sure this thing was going to bust. He's up there leaning and yanking and pulling, and there's only one screw holding that thing on. All the other ones don't do anything. But I shouldn't have said that, because now I just lost my train of thought. Proverbs 8:13. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Or the fear of the Lord is to hate evil. When we were in Tonga for 3 months, Tonga has, like here, it has a lot of wild pigs. And pigs leave, we came up with this great saying of the putrid piles of pig poop. And not one of us wanted to run up and grab those putrid piles of pig poop and play in it. We hated that stuff. It stunk, it attracted flies, it was a disaster. We had to somehow get rid of it. That wasn't a work duty I ever wanted to have, but sometimes we all got that work duty. But the fear of the Lord is the hatred of evil. Does your heart hate evil? If it doesn't, then you're lacking in a maturity in the fear of the Lord. If the fear of the Lord is abounding and growing and expanding, then we will hate evil. And it's not very often you do what you hate. Do you? How often do you do what you hate? You try to avoid it, just like we tried to avoid those putrid piles of pig poop. You avoid evil and wrong. You hate it and don't get involved in it when the fear of the Lord is growing and developing and strengthening in your life. Okay, so some people say, the fear of the Lord, that quote we just read, it just means to respect or to reverence God. Well, I hate to break it to you, but every word in the Hebrew that is used for fear at one point or another is used in the context of the fear of the Lord. Don't ask me to pronounce them, but there's the main Hebrew word, and it means to fear or to be afraid of, to revere or to be in awe of. That doesn't just mean, oh yeah, I respect. The next one here means to tremble. Like you've seen something, like it said Moses, when he came down off the mountain, was trembling in fear. Another one is terror. That's the word that's used in Proverbs 1:7. The terror of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Again, it's not just respect or admiration or reverence. It is actually having a fear. And how do you balance, again, the fear of God and the love of God? Again, pretty much every Hebrew word has been used in the different passages that talk about the fear of the Lord. So it's not just, oh yeah, I respect God. I reverence God, and that's the fear of the Lord. It's way beyond that. If that's all you've ever got in the fear of the Lord, that's a good first step. But you got to take another step. You got to move forward. You've got to seek the fear of the Lord. You've got to call out for the fear of the Lord. In Greek, there's really only one word, phobio, or something to that effect. Phobia, we get the word phobia or fear. I saw that phobio, and it reminded me of the Wizard of Oz. Weren't all those guards in the witch's palace singing, phobio, oh. I've always thought it was Oreo they were singing, but I figured it out. They were singing phobio. Not Fabio, Mark, phobia. But it's the only Greek word, and yet the fear of the Lord is mentioned many times in the New Testament, including by Jesus. And people say, oh, it doesn't belong to believers, just to unbelievers. But when Jesus says, don't fear those who can kill the body and after that can do nothing, I'll tell you who to fear.